hearing. And today's hearing is really quite simple. It's to have a walkthrough of the governor's corrections budget, and we're joined today by officials from the corrections department to walk us through that. There's a PowerPoint that we'll be referencing that should be also copied at each of the members' desks, and we have distributed the budget books as well. Members, I would ask that you let my LA Jason know whether or not you want to take your book with you. I'm okay with that. I know oftentimes members prefer to just read it at their own comfort and mark it up, etc. My only caution is make sure you bring it to the meetings, because you'll be able to reference it later on as we start, in fact, marking up the appropriations parts of our omnibus bill. You're certainly free to leave them here, and committee staff will make sure that we'll shuttle them back and forth between meetings. So with that, Chair Constant, I'm going to turn to you and have you lead us in the presentation of the corrections budget.
Thank you, Chair Mariani. Commissioner Stell, would you like to begin?
Thank you, chairs and committee member. It's an honor to be able to present the governor's budget tonight on corrections. I also want to just make sure that I speak to the fact that we're really appreciative of the time and attention the committee has given to corrections in general over the past several weeks. It's much appreciated, and I think it's helpful. Brings, I think, incredible attention to the hard work that corrections does, and is much appreciated. You were given two packets tonight. One is, it provides the budget overview. This is the governor's budget. These were the additions and requests that are being made. And the second one is a supplementary PowerPoint. And that supplementary document really provides background information on the distribution of our budget, that may be useful and maybe something that we can refer to as we take questions. With me tonight is Chris Dodge, who's the Chief Financial Officer, and I will readily defer to him when it comes to the finer points of the numbers. In addition, we have a whole myriad of Department of Corrections staff here to be able to answer most any question that members may have. With that, I just would like to say that as we presented the budget, I made this request to the governor and had conversations with the governor about the budget that we're going to present with you tonight, to you tonight. We wanted a budget that really reflected the whole of the Department of Corrections. Oftentimes, as you all know, that we can think about corrections or think about any form of government by virtue of its units or its function. In our case, we are typically divided in two areas, one being the facilities or the prison side, the other being field services. Ultimately, as we began to think about our budget and what the budget reflected, we felt that it was really important that we work across the divisions, recognize the importance of each of their respective work, and at the same time, understand that the two are inextricably linked in many respects. And that is what I believe this budget reflects. This budget reflects, I think, ultimately what is a focus on our mission. And we've talked about this as a reduction of recidivism, the promotion of offender change, the use of proven strategies, and ultimately that affects the public safety through effective community supervision. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Dodge to talk a little bit about the distribution of the budget.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members. My name is Chris Dodge, and I am the Chief Financial Officer for the Department of Corrections. We just have a couple of overview slides on our budget. Our fiscal year 19 budget is $588.139 million. It represents about 2.5% of the governor's total general fund budget, and 96% of our operating budget comes from the general fund. So we have very limited other funds available. 13% of our budget is pass-through money that goes directly to our county partners. And the other 87% is direct services for the department. We do have 3 divisions or programs in our agency. The largest in terms of dollars and FTEs is the Correctional Institutions Division, 73.3% of our budget. Community Services, 22% of our budget. And Operations Support, which is all of the support functions, including human resources, finance, policy and legal, planning and performance, and others, represents only less than 5% of our overall budget, general fund budget.
The budget request really is focused on a variety of 10 key areas, and we're going to have a moment to kind of talk about each of these and their importance. At the end, the total amount of this of the funding request is approximately $111 million. And I'm going to walk us through each of these areas, so we'll go into them in a bit more detail and can answer questions that members may have. First and foremost was the need for an operating adjustment, and this becomes somewhat of a question that many people oftentimes ask. This really becomes, how do we fund the base budget of the Department of Corrections? In other words, how do we fund things like step increases, or the state's portion of health insurance costs, or the state's portion of pension costs that get passed along, or federal tax obligations? Because of the way the budget is done, these funds are not projected into the future, and so each biennium, we need to come back with a request to address and cover the costs associated with our current operations. And as you can see, it is in 20, it is 10.5 million, and in 21, it is $17.7 million. This, as I said, is simply to keep our budget operational. And if we did not have this funding, this has the equivalent of upwards of 300 FTEs. This funding is what this funding represents. And so I think it does become important that people just understand that this is not something that the department caused to happen. It is something that is just a part of being an employer and having the obligations that we have, either by contract, by law, or by the costs associated with being an employer. One of the key areas, the large areas that is in this budget, is really prison security and safety. And this has been one of the areas that has received considerable attention. And this is broken into kind of 3 broad areas: staffing, some security infrastructure and technology modernization, and then, of course, the restrictive housing program, or segregation, which has received a considerable amount of attention. This is a total request of about $44 million over the biennium, and we'll talk about what this looks like. Ultimately, when we talked about this, we wanted to focus on a staffing analysis that really looks at the way in which we do our business across all of the operational divisions. And operational divisions meaning the prison side as well as the field side. We want to make sure that we're creating safer, more secure prison environments for both our staff and for the inmates that we house. We want to make sure that we increase ultimately the safety of our community by ensuring that the quality of programming that we offer meets the needs of those people who are going to be coming back to our community. And as we've talked about in this community before, 95% of those in our correctional facilities will be coming back to communities across our state. This request also includes increases for staffing of operations and programming, including the addition of 120 correctional officers over the biennium. Another core element was the look at technology and prison technology modernization. We know that in our facilities, and many of you had the opportunity to see some of this in action, our facilities really operate with the use of technology, incredible investments in cameras that allow us to monitor certain areas of the facility, which keeps our officers as well as those who live in our facilities safer. We have over 5,000 workstations throughout the Department of Corrections and 400 servers. We connect to a variety of state and federal criminal justice information systems. And obviously, one of the key things that has come up in the committee before is our need to be able to provide you as policymakers with key information so that you can make good decisions around how you fund us and hold us accountable to the work that we need to accomplish on behalf of Minnesota. This is an investment, so in one-time investment in replacement and updating of security systems, cameras, cell door controls, and perimeter protection. In addition, it updates obsolete security systems and addresses those issues where data privacy could be compromised. We also, in this area, focus on the fact that we want to engage in evidence-based practices, the need for that.
Commissioner Snell?
That has been an area
Commissioner
of-
Snell?
Yes.
Chair Mariani has a question.
Thank you, Chair Considine. I guess the first question is of you is, would you prefer that we ask questions as we go along in the budget or wait to the entire presentation?
If you're asking my preference, I would say that we do it at the end of each unit.
I defer to the chairs in terms of how you'd like to manage that.
Well, Mr. Chair, my question goes back to the prison security and safety staffing. So maybe that's the end of one unit because you're in infrastructure now. And I know that earlier this morning in the Corrections Subcommittee, there was a conversation relative to the bill that you authored about the correctional officers, but I know that members of this committee who are not on that, have not had the benefit of that conversation. And that could be a long one, but really basically my question is just a short one. If the commissioner can tell us, what is the relationship of the 120 correctional officers in the governor's bill relative to the, I don't know if it's 80, or I think it's right, officers that the department has had the direction and the appropriations to fill. Is that 80 within this 120, or is that a separate number? So it's really to that issue.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is an addition. At present, we have, again, this is a moving target. We just had an academy start in the past week. But, we talked about having 80 current vacancies, 80 to 90 current vacancies, that those positions remain unfilled, or we're in the process of working to fill them. This would be on top of that. So if we take 80, we're really talking about between now and the end of the biennium, the next biennium, we're talking about the need to hire 200 additional correctional officers. So this, when we think about prison safety and security from the standpoint of restrictive housing, this has been an area of considerable attention. Representative Zerwas has had a lot of interest, and we'll be talking more about this, I believe, with a bill that's going to be coming up, I think, tomorrow. But we really are focusing on, as we look to better make our facilities safer, we need to make sure that we're investing heavily in evidence-based practices that we know, based on what the evidence and what the data tells us, can reduce recidivism and address offender misconduct. The budget proposal includes the ability for us to maximize this by increasing caseworkers, by increasing behavioral health staff, by providing more cognitive skills therapy and mental health counseling, at multiple facilities, especially those facilities that provide and carry out restrictive housing measures throughout the system. Offender health care has been an area of considerable interest and no doubt considerable cost. This, I believe in the last session, there was a bill that did not, was included, but ultimately did not become law. What this request does is it addresses the critical need for us to fulfill our contractual obligations for offender health care. It expands nursing care in our facilities to provide 24/7 nursing care in 3 more of our facilities, and meets the both federal and state requirement that we have an electronic health record system. I would just point out that the photograph there is an actual photograph of the way that our records are today stored. And this creates significant challenges for our medical personnel, especially when offenders leave our facilities and go to either into, for instance, a halfway house, and there may be some type of medical issue, and the ability to access these records, while it can be done, it's not done efficiently, and it's not done in accordance with both state and federal mandates. This budget request would address that by providing, broadening our access to an electronic health record system through our current medical provider. We spend right now, I should just say, we spend right now nearly $90 million a year on healthcare services to people in our corrections facilities. So this is really an incredible number, and I think reflects the broad range of needs of those that are in our facilities, both on the mental health as well as medical fronts. Integrated case management is also a proven and an evidence-based approach. This ultimately reduces the number of people on caseloads. It focuses on positive behavioral approaches and addressing criminogenic thinking. It is ultimately proven to reduce recidivism in a significant way. And particularly, this resource is applied to those offenders who are deemed as being highest risk and having the highest levels of need. We also focus, and we know, and the research has told us, that these cognitive skills-based interventions with this population becomes critically important. I like to describe this integrated case management as almost intensive case management, and it provides for what I believe should be a warm handoff between of the offender between when they are in prison and going into reentry services, going out into the field. And I think there was a time when because of the way we were able to manage, which a much smaller population, where field agents and case managers in the facility were able to manage that handoff in a very kind of human way, where they had talked and had worked and collaborated together around that offender. And I think what an integrated case management would do is would allow us to have that happen again. In particular, for those inmates, those offenders, where that need is greatest. Pretrial assessment and supervision. Right now in Minnesota, about 25% of Minnesota counties have pretrial assessment and supervision, mostly on a small scale. A recent policy change by the judicial branch to reduce disparities in pretrial detention for those oftentimes who cannot make bail. This was a requirement that counties begin to provide pretrial assessment and supervision of these people accused of or facing charges. This provides for the assessment of those folks in county jails, and develops supervision strategies to be able to manage them in the community, which those with resources would normally participate in through the use of bail. And we do this by using validated assessment tools that it also ensures the protection of the community as we do this. This comes with about an $8 million cost over the biennium. But we believe it is a part of really looking at corrections more systemically, how we manage offenders from the time they enter the system all the way through to reentry. And what we hope and what we work toward is pro-social reintegration. Intensive supervised release. Intensive supervised release has been around for some period of time. Intensive supervised release provides agents to go out and provide around-the-clock supervision of these people at various different times of the night and the day. These offenders are oftentimes people who have highest risk for violence and oftentimes have the highest need. They can include predatory offenders, and with ISR or intensive supervised release, there are statutory requirements in terms of caseload size because the legislature saw, when this was developed, the need for that to be intensive, to be focused so that we could ensure community safety through sound supervision. These agents oftentimes work in partnership with one another. There's two agents who do this, and what this budget request would do, again, just shy of $10 million over the biennium. It improves the ISR agent's safety. They can work in pairs, and it better addresses the broad range of needs, increases our ability to add and put people out on ISR. And ultimately, if one of our strategies is to reduce our population, one of the ways we can help do that is by restructuring people who may have had a technical violation in the community to a period of intensive supervision. This also invests in safety supplies, such as radios that can be used in areas where there is no cell phone coverage. And this really is an important, as many of you know, my previous life was as a police chief, just recently in Inver Grove Heights. And their Dakota County agents who were working intensive supervision had access to a police radio. They would check out on calls, and the officers throughout the county were aware of where they were in the event that there would be a problem. And it was just really sound practice and really important for the safety of the agents and really the safety of the community. This includes, included in this is not simply the DOC, but there is a significant portion of dollars that are pass-through dollars that go out to Community Corrections Act counties who are providing this supervision in the community. And it provides the services as well, both in the metro area as well as outstate. Victim notification and juvenile correctional records management system. This really is about the replacement and rebuilding of systems that are outdated. And we all know, I think, the importance of corrections in terms of the work with victims. Part of the business of justice is ensuring that victims feel like they have a voice, that they know what's happening. And for many victims, wanting to have and receive the information, which I would add is a right by Minnesota law, this system becomes necessary. This is an investment of dollars in rebuilding a system that was antiquated and discontinued operation, and allows victims to opt in, to register, and to receive notifications in the event of a change of placement of an offender, which we believe is fundamentally empowering. In addition to that, these dollars also address needed upgrades to the juvenile management system, which is really the records management system, and does a better job of connecting this system to the DOC's central comms system. Becomes necessary because right now this system is operating off of very old technology and not something that can be sustained over the long haul. Electronic monitoring and transitional housing for high-risk offenders. We know that effective monitoring and housing does become important elements of reducing recidivism and maximizing community safety. Over the last several years, there has been a significant increase in the use of electronic monitoring and transitional housing because oftentimes when some of these offenders are released from our facilities, they simply cannot access housing. Electronic monitoring becomes one of the keys that we manage those offenders that are of highest risk. And the ability to access some forms of transitional housing in the community is a way of getting people out of our facilities in accordance with the law and managing them in the community and being able to more adequately supervise them while they're out. Which obviously becomes an important part of our mission and really our responsibility to the people of Minnesota. These dollars would help us, we believe also, when it comes to addressing some of the churn that ultimately affects officer safety within our facilities, as well as the safety of residents inside of our facilities. Because of the number of short-term returnees that are coming back into our facilities, we think that some of these dollars can help us to manage those people in the community in a better way through electronic monitoring or through accessing some of the transitional housing programs or halfway house programs that we currently utilize, but we could potentially be more effective in managing the use of those beds with these dollars. Corrections opioid treatment provisions. As many of you know, is really part of the overall opioid package that both the Senate and the House have been discussing. We know that an increasing number of people are coming into the Department of Corrections with opioid addiction, and we need to have a broader range of tools to address this. What this does is it invests in pre-release planning services, the establishment and maximization of our treatment programs targeted at opioid addiction and the use of medication-assisted treatment options within the facilities. And I believe several of the county jails are initiating this as well, because the number of people that are leaving our facilities and die as a result of opioid addiction is a very real and present issue. And this is, we believe, a method of being able to manage that. Finally, we talk about reducing recidivism through connecting families and reentry programs. This is really a $2 million investment over the course of the biennium. This invests in transportation services to reduce visiting barriers for children of incarcerated offenders. We know that the more connection there is between offenders, those who are incarcerated, and their families, in particular their children, the less likely they are to recidivate. And this becomes one of the important tools. We also need to recognize that we know that upon release, having adequate community-based supports becomes an important feature of success. Ultimately, we believe providing services to be able to keep these families together, to be able to keep the families of incarcerated offenders visiting, maintaining that relationship becomes a core component of successful reintegration and reentry. Second component of this is improving parenting skills for incarcerated parents. One of the things that I found remarkable when I arrived at the Department of Corrections was some of the feedback we received from people who had been released from prison. And one of the most demanded programs was an interest in parenting programs. And I think that's it's critically important as we think about how it is that we break the cycle of offending and that can happen within families. This becomes one of the key ways to address that. And what this does is it provides dollars for parenting skills programming that is evidence-based and is effective at helping these offenders, when they get back into the community, more effectively parent and become part and parcel to keeping their children out of the very system that they're leaving. And then finally, I just left this afternoon the meeting of the MIAC, the tribal with the tribes, and certainly one of the areas of interest for them was ensuring a commitment on behalf of Minnesota and the Department of Corrections in this case, that we would honor and recognize what oftentimes we think is the need to provide highly culturally specific services to incarcerated Native Americans in our facilities. We oftentimes think that the best way to do things is the way we believe we should do things. And I think ultimately when we think about Native Americans in our facilities, to be smart, to be culturally responsive, I think is a reflection of our desire to make sure that our system is as equitable as it can be. And to be able to make an investment of having Native American programs that exist in our communities to provide services to Native American offenders before they release and upon their release becomes one of the key and critical issues, we think, to addressing the profound disparities that exist with Native Americans in the criminal justice system in general. And with that, chairs and committee members, I would open it up to questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Snell. And I just actually have a comment. This afternoon, I learned about a program in Michigan for reentry in which they are connecting the residents as they are leaving with their local community health centers, setting up a appointment within the first week to establish primary care, but then also to have a continuity of care, particularly as it comes to behavioral medicine. And like I said, just heard about that this afternoon. I'm not sure how fast we can get something together for that, maybe a pilot program, but I really liked it. Also, I'm very interested in the parenting program. If I may, 1991, I won the statewide award for jail programs with a parenting program in Blue Earth County. So it's something that, I've had an interest in for some time. I can see Representative O'Neill is now bending her microphone, so Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's actually to that point. I happen to know that there used to be a bus that went around and picked up the kids and brought them to the prisons. But that program ended, and can you explain why it ended? And I know a nonprofit, maybe some churches or something, had done the same thing, and they also came into the same difficulty. So can you explain what actually happened and why that program was ended?
Mr. Chair, Representative O'Neill, the exact reason I can't, but I know that part of it was based on some funding. Ultimately, I think we need to make a commitment to this, because this is really an important and key proven strategy around reconnection. And I believe that in many cases, some of that was continued because of the kind of philanthropic efforts of some of the nonprofits who are providing those services. But after a period of time, it becomes difficult for them to continue to do that. And I think over the course of time, based on some of the historical data that I've looked at, there has been changes and desires to look at a range of different programming, and oftentimes we forget about the most basic of services, and that is keeping these families together. And to your point, I think we need to make a commitment. I think that's reflected in the budget to try to keep these families together during incarceration.
Thank you.
Representative O'Neill, you have a follow-up?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was understanding that they didn't have any kids to pick up, that the kids just didn't have interest or they couldn't get anyone to actually come to the prisons. Is that accurate?
Mr. Chair, Representative O'Neill, I believe that one of the things that we know was that there had, some of the challenges that they faced was the ability to kind of connect with. When there was services that were reaching out to the families, to the moms or the dads or grandparents or whoever the children were living with, when those arrangements were made and there was strong connections made, the young people did access those services. One of the things that I think has become clear is that in the absence of good wraparound services, and that's one of the things that with this program we would like to see included, is that there is a level of support for making arrangements for those kids to be able to get out and visit their incarcerated parents, but also to process what that experience is like when they leave. Because I think we all know what it can mean for some of us to be inside those facilities. It can be, I can only imagine how difficult it could be for young people. But we have to be the ones to help make that happen. And I think that's what this program would include.
Another follow-up,
Yes.
Representative O'Neill?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Schnell. I would just caution that if we're going to do this again, that we have a good plan in place so that we actually have kids to pick up and, we don't put all that money into it and they don't actually want to come or are aware of it. Or I'm not sure exactly what happened, but I know that there weren't kids actually to pick up and that's why the program ended. On another question though, I was the chair of the subcommittee on employee relations and had the opportunity to review 18 of the state employee contracts. And in so doing, looking back at the historical information, I found that in one contract alone out of those 18, the information provided to the SCR as to how much that contract would cost was actually off by 40%. And so when that money was actually spent and that contract was actually implemented across the board, it was a 40% increase, more than what was anticipated. And I'm seeing something in your budget proposal that sort of speaks to that, and that was something that we had great concern about. And I actually asked the former commissioner, well, he's now the commissioner again, Commissioner Franz, if he could commit to the subcommittee on employee relations that he in fact had talked to the commissioners to make sure that these increases could be absorbed within the budgets already passed, and he assured me that they could, but now I'm seeing that that's not actually true. I see $28 million that you are, and it's interesting to me that it's $28 million and we haven't hired the 80, so I'm not sure how that all calculates in that, we had appropriated for 80 more corrections officers. So can you just speak to that? And it's really a great concern that the contracts are looked at not as deeply as they probably should so that we can do proper budgeting when we come to here. And so I think my concern is that we do proper budgeting here so we really know what the contracts are going to cost and that whatever parameters that we set, the contracts are actually negotiated within those parameters. And historically, they have not been. And so I'm bringing that to your attention and see if you have a comment about that as well.
Mr. Chair, Representative O'Neill, one of the things that was, to be honest, it was eye-opening for me was the fact that in many of the governments that I've worked at prior, mostly municipal governments, that when there was an authorized staffing strength, that that was projected, the costs were projected over the course of the term of employment. That is not how the state budgets in terms of this. They establish the budget on a number of FTEs for a biennium or for a given period of time. And a lot of the cost tails that go along with that employment in accordance with the contract, whether that's step increases or changes to pension, are not factored. And what ends up happening then is if you have, and I'm just going to use a number to make it simple, if we have an authorized strength of 100, and we don't factor the entire life of the contract of those 100 employees, that essentially what happens here is that we are coming in and having to ask for, oftentimes in arrears of, actions that we simply aren't a part of. That changes in policy, whether that's on the pension side or on healthcare costs, come up after a budget gets set. And to be frank, that's going to happen potentially again, depending upon the outcomes of collective bargaining that is going on now. That we are going to, this contract does not make any assumptions for increases any increases in collective bargaining that may happen going forward. And so ultimately, the department, in this case, the Department of Corrections finds itself in a position of oftentimes having to play catch up.
Just one final comment.
Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate your deference. So that would be my concern and my caution, that you would be very closely connected to those that are actually negotiating the budgets or the contracts, excuse me, that you have to live within. That's something that hasn't been done historically, as I look back through, biennium after biennium. And we are in the exact same position as you just stated, that these contracts are negotiated, and the legislature is told that the contracts fall within the parameters of the budget already passed, when in fact they don't. And then you come back and say, oh, I need $28 million more, or, it depends on the agency, 100 million, or, it's hundreds of millions of dollars more than what was anticipated. So my ask is that you would stick very closely to Commissioner Franz and make sure that we have those contracts negotiated within the parameters of what we're passing here, because it's just a cyclical thing that's happening, biennium after biennium after biennium. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative O'Neill. And I would tell you that we are looking at a program for a bus to take children. But your second part of your budget, I have some concerns about the budget, and I want to look at it a little bit closer and make sure that everything spells out. But we are looking at a program that would take children to Shakopee and reconnect them with their mothers. Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for coming here tonight, Commissioner. I'm looking at my different things here, and I'm sort of new to this, so I have a question, if you could probably point me to it. On the county pass-through funding on your supplemental sheets, with the CCA, the way I understand it, I had some people come and talk to me in my office, and that's the subsidy to those 34 counties that essentially help with probation services. Is that correct?
That's correct.
What is the proposed increase in that in the next biennium? I'm not quite, I think it's in this book, but I'm not quite finding how it's divided out, so. Go ahead.
Mr. Chair and Representative Miller?
Yep.
Okay, so two of our components do include funding for pass-through to the counties. One of them is, and bear with me here while I find it.
This is in my budget book?
Right. One of them is for the pretrial assessment and supervision.
Okay.
That does include $1.75 million in fiscal year 20 and $3.5 million in fiscal year 21 to go to CCA and CPO counties.
Okay.
And then the other one is intensive supervised release, and that includes about approximately $2 million in fiscal year 20 and $4 million in fiscal year 21 to go to CCA counties. The percentage we use is approximately DOC is the recipient of about 36% of these funds, and the county partners are a recipient of about 64% of the funding.
Okay, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Representative Miller, you have a
Actually, someone
follow-up?
afterwards can point where this, I mean, I know it's in here, but I still didn't find it. Just rough, what's the percentage increase on those into the next, over the next biennium? Just rough.
Why, the total pass-through funding now is about $75 million. This would increase it by about $7.5 million a year, so probably about 10% overall.
Thank you, thank you.
Just comment on that it also comes with the new responsibilities too, for the CCA counties. So just if that's your concern.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, then one final comment on that.
Okay, go ahead.
So I know some probation service people, and they're, I'm sure you know this way better than I do, but those are stress services at this time. And those are the, if we're going to put a point of emphasis in our system on the probationary side of it, we need to make sure that we certainly have that. I hear phrases like drive-by probationary services and things like that, because you just can't keep up with the sheer number of people with the resources available. So if we're going to put an ever-increasing emphasis on probation services as opposed to incarceration, just make sure that the budgets reflect that. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Miller. Representative Edelson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair, Commissioner. So for prison security and safety, you have allotted $20 million in fiscal year '20. I see that it was great to see the correction officers here today. It was good. I see 120 correctional officers, but how about for on page 13, the third bullet down, increase caseworkers and behavioral staff? I mean, I imagine you're a social worker, you know, I met a lot of these people in the prisons have underlying mental health issues. I know that you're doing a pretty good job in treating them, but how, in this budget, how many more behavioral workers and staff are you anticipating adding with that?
So in, Mr. Chair, Representative, in this proposal, we are looking to increase, let's find it here, in our case management area, there is the expansion of staff to the tune of, is it 24? 24 additional FTEs for case management and support services in the facilities to work with and manage the needs of these offenders.
Representative Edelson, you have a follow-up?
Thank you, Chair. Yes. So for the 24 of the prisons, will they equally be divided? How will that work in terms of staffing?
The exact allocation, Representative, will be identified based upon need. And we have some facilities where there is a significantly higher need in terms of when I talk about need, I'm talking about risk and need. Because ultimately, we want to make sure that we're applying those resources to the offenders that have the highest risk and the highest criminogenic need.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Representative Zerwas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the Commissioner, thank you for coming this evening and presenting to the committee. Commissioner, there's a pretty big gap between what we have as a requested correctional officer request coming from the majority party bill, and I'm a co-author on the bill, and from what's coming down in the governor's budget. I'm just wondering, I think we talked about this a little bit this morning, but for individuals that weren't able to be there, part of that discussion, if you could elaborate on kind of what's being brought forward from the representatives of the line employees versus what's coming down in the budget from the governor's office and the department, if you could address that difference.
Mr. Chair, Representative Zerwas, yes, I think when we looked at this, we factored in the current vacancies that we have and wanted to be really realistic about what we believe we can actually hire and get into the facilities. We think that was first and foremost. The other thing I would point out is that the GOM bill is over 2 bienniums. The proposed is a single. And I think really it became important for us to really think about what we could realistically do. There is no doubt, and we've had this discussion before about the need that exists. The question really is, we did not want to come in and make an ask that we did not believe that we could satisfy in a meaningful way.
Representative Zerwas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to that point about being able to fill the positions that you're authorized to hire for, if you could recap for the Joint Committee the number of current openings and the strategy to fill the current openings that you can't have yet been unable to fill.
Mr. Chair, Representative Zerwas, I think when we looked at this issue, there's a whole variety of factors that we are taking into account. First and foremost, one of the things that we need to do is really look at the competitiveness of us as an employer with correctional officers. As we've talked about before in the committee, many of the counties are bringing people in at between $3 to $5, $6, $7 an hour more than where RCOs are starting. In order to attract and retain those dollars become important. Now, let me be clear, working for the state and working for the Department of Corrections is a great career. And over the course of a lifetime, I think the earnings are good, the benefits are good, but ultimately, in order to attract and retain, we really need to make to bring people in. The second thing that we realized is that over the course of time, in particular when the job market was very different, we would have hundreds of people applying for a very small number of openings. Today, we find ourselves that flipped. We have, in many cases, 100+ openings across the DOC in general, and very few applicants. So one of the things that we began to look at is, are there ways that we could bring people on quicker while maintaining kind of high levels of standards around who we bring in the door? And by working with HR and MMB, we are in the process of devising a plan and really executing this plan where we would do more facility-based recruitment and hiring that would allow people who may be from that given community or broader region to come into that facility, apply for employment, learn more about the job itself, fill out their application, go through an interview process, and potentially even have the first phase of background investigation completed. And so that instead of it taking, in some cases, several months to bring somebody on, that we could have somebody have a conditional offer for employment potentially within days. And then once the conditions have been met, we could bring them in to a facility-based training experience that ultimately we believe connects them, gives them that necessary experience even before they start the academy in some instances, so they're not waiting 6 weeks or whatever it may be to get into that academy. We think expediting this process will go a long way, but it's going to require the totality of approaches in order to make this successful.
Representative Zerwas, would you have a follow-up by any chance?
A few. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I love the approach. I love the change in the approach, the expediency, and in this job market, you're right. Competitors are offering jobs at a much quicker rate than DOC was previously able to compete with. But what are the actual openings that have been kind of out there? I mean, we're talking about bringing on an additional 120 officers, and I guess my point is we can talk about raising the authorized amount till we're blue in the face. We're already sitting on dozens and dozens and dozens of CO positions that you just can't hire for.
Right. Representative Zerwas, you're right. We would need to, over the course of the remainder of this biennium through the next, hire 200 correctional officers. And the only way that we could do that realistically was to begin to change some of our processes, and we believe the plan we have will help do that. We are going to begin to reach out more heavily with the schools, the colleges. Representative O'Neill talked about that this morning. We're really working to diversify our correctional officer workforce. And we believe, much like reaching out to the kids who may benefit from visiting their parents, we have to be more high touch today in order to bring people in the door. And I think that's our plan. That's the strategy to accomplish that goal.
Mr. Chair.
Representative Zerwas.
I'm wondering, Commissioner, if off the top of your head or with a phone a friend, you can tell the committee for a line officer how many years it takes to get to the top correctional officer pay scale. Because when I found out about this, I was pretty stunned.
Mr. Chair, Representative Zerwas, I've heard a lot about this in my visits. I'll be the first to tell you the exact number of years I can't say, but many people talked about it. It could take more than a decade to
12
to get to top of scale. And again, this becomes, I think, one of the important considerations that obviously is a subject to some level of collective bargaining. But ultimately, one of the things that happened in my previous work in law enforcement, one of the ways we managed retention of people was to try and shorten the scale to bring people up to the top quicker.
And Mr. Chair, that's kind of my point. I think the commissioner alluded to it. And my next question was going to be, in your previous line of work, what was the longest that any of your police officers had to get to top patrol? I've never heard of a department over 7 years. Most nowadays are 5 years to get to top patrol. The idea that our corrections officers are in position for over a decade, I've heard 12 or 13 years to get to the top of the pay scale. What that ends up creating is it creates corrections officers that are in for 3 or 5 years of training that the state pays for to get pulled out to a county jail at still about a $5 to $7 an hour raise on day one. We train them, we get them experience, we get them ready, and the county jails take them because our scale is so long to get them to the top. Who's going to sit in the same position for 12 years to get to the top of the pay scale? That's not realistic. And so we can budget money to hire another 120 correctional officers. And if we factor in the number of openings that we have currently, as the commissioner said, that means we have to hire 200 officers to hit that mark. Even if we do that, if we don't address this pay scale, we're not going to keep them. One last question, if you'll indulge me. Mr. Commissioner, what's your retention rate of COs?
So we have done some looking at retention. So I'll give you just a little bit of an example. Of the correctional officers hired in calendar year 18, 78% of those were still employed on January 24th of 19. Now, again, this is a little bit shorter a period of time. And ultimately, when we begin to think about this, that about 78%, we're losing somewhere around between 20 and 25% of the people that we're hiring. And I think, this was eye-opening for me. In the first half of this fiscal year, 7/1/18 through 12/31, 151 COs were hired. That's a lot of hiring. But to your point, we know that one of our challenges is that we oftentimes lose many of these people either very early on, and I think we too are concerned about losing that 2-year or 3-year officer who we've made an investment in. And obviously, one of the things that we need to do is address this to make this a job that is competitive throughout the market, and I think really reflects the importance of the work.
Yeah, and Mr.
Representative Verois, why I share your passion, and I'm not normally one for a lot of protocol, let's try to get back.
Well, and Mr. Chair, I guess the last thing I would say
Okay, go
is
ahead.
the numbers that I saw at 5 years have a 5-year retention, a loss rate of nearly a third. And so we're investing a lot of money in training individuals that just flat aren't sticking around because their entry level pay is not enough. But the idea that this pay scale is stretched out over 12 years, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And so unless there is a concerted effort moving forward by the Department of Corrections to address that portion of it, saying we're going to hire an additional 120 people doesn't much make sense.
And Representative Zerwas, again, appreciate your passion, and we are on the same page with that. But I will try to get things back on a little bit more of the correct protocol. I know I've not ever been one that's been terribly good about it. You have something else you want to add,
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner?
just to Representative Zerwas's point, I do believe, and I say this in all honesty, that I do believe that that we can make these hires. I think it's necessary for us to make them for the good and well-being of our facilities and for our staff. And I do believe that the department, we certainly would like to raise the pay of everyone. But I think ultimately we also are in a position where we have to honor the collective bargaining process and the agreements that get forged. And ultimately, I think the attention that's been given to corrections by this committee and the attention in general, given the deaths of Officers Gum and Parisi, I think raise the specter of the importance of this as we go forward. And I think collectively, there is a need to address this, but I do believe that we can get there.
Thank you, Commissioner. Representative Christensen.
Thank you, Chair. Am I on here? Is it on? Okay. I have a question about programming. We haven't talked about that much. So where does funding for programming fall into all of this? And, obviously there's going to be funding needs for the programming itself and then for the staff that you need for programming. So I know I've spoken quite a bit with the education folks in the Stillwater system, and they could sure use a lot of help, I think, too, in programming. So just curious where that falls into this whole pie chart that we have here.
Mr. Chair, Representative Christensen, thank you. I think one of the things that happens, one of the challenges that we face right now is, we've talked about before, nothing happens in a prison facility without security. We can't move people to programming. We believe that with adequate security staffing, we do have the ability to expand the capacity for people to access programming today, even educationally. We could grow the numbers of people that we provide educational services to. But in order for that to happen, we need to make sure that we bolster, in particular, in those in facilities like Stillwater, where there is adequate staffing to get the inmates to the programming and to provide supports to education staff or other program staff, treatment staff, as a for instance, while they're in those programs. So we do believe we have some capacity there to expand the number of inmates that can access those programs, but we need the security staff in order to do that safely.
Thank you, Commissioner. Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kind of back to the retention issue, this was a conversation you and I had in my office, and I had a few corrections officers come in and kind of tell me their day-to-day life and how challenging it is. But one of the things that we talked about was management and leadership style, and it's something that we haven't talked about much in here, but it relates directly to retention, and since we do have a retention issue and it's going to be challenging to hire that many folks, can you just talk about your plan about helping the leaders and the management do a little bit better job and helping them to be more supportive, I think, of the corrections officers that they do supervise?
Mr. Chair, Representative O'Neill, yes, I think this is an area I think that we are given significant emphasis to at the department. We've been just meeting with wardens and all the staff to talk about really what the importance, what the objectives are, and that is to ensure and work toward the success of all the people that we have contact with. And that's certainly the leadership objective standard that I want to apply to myself, to ensure the success of others, as well throughout the ranks. And that becomes important. There's no doubt that the work of correction staff is exceedingly difficult. And I think that we're in an environment, and I saw some of this in my previous life in law enforcement, where there was the need to, one, have really high standards for the people who do this work. And at the same time, to ensure that we're providing equally high levels of support, encouragement, seeing and having to deal with the things that correctional staff across the board, our nurses, our treatment staff, our case managers, our COs, deal with on a day-to-day basis is really tough. And I think one of the things that we are exploring and have been working with the collective bargaining units on is addressing some of the needs of people from the standpoint of officer and staff wellness. And this is an area that we have to do better, because I think it is part and parcel to retention. And so it's a comprehensive package in terms of what we expect of leadership and the way we look at leadership within the Department of Corrections. But it also is being very concrete about the fact that this is tough work, and we don't want people taking this stuff home to their families, because it can be tough enough without bringing it home to them.
Thank you, Commissioner. Did you have another follow-up?
Just one last small little question, just 30 seconds.
Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the last question is just about the opioid prevention, and you're going to be using money from the opioid stewardship fund. If it's created, what are you going to do if it's not created?
Mr. Chair, Representative O'Neill, while certainly we would hope that there's a comprehensive approach to addressing the issues around opioid use, addiction, and all of the medical things that come as a result of it, what we will have to do is do the best we can. That with our existing medical staff, we will do everything we can to provide the necessary treatment services. But the reality is, to meet the demands of the number of people that are coming into our facilities that are afflicted with this addiction is a demand that I think will have implications in other areas of our medical and treatment care of people in our facilities. So I think it becomes incumbent upon us to think about the ways that we ultimately address the needs. Simply put, I think it's tragic to have people leave prison after whatever period of incarceration it is, and know that for some of these particular offenders, that they will die shortly after their release without much needed intervention. And I think there's a moral obligation for us to provide services that we think will make a difference.
Just a follow,
You promised. No.
I'm just-
Representative O'Neill.
just something that, as we're doing budgeting, we're getting to the final nuts and bolts of things and into final negotiations, just something to think of as you're working on the budget, that if the stewardship fund doesn't go into effect for some reason, as we're doing the last bit, that maybe you want to hold aside a few dollars just to help them out, because I think in the long run, you're going to have a big impact.
Thank you, Representative O'Neill, and I think Chair Murray and I are both open up to that idea. And to your previous question, I am going to be meeting with some custody officers next week to talk about some supports that we might institute. You're right, they need some more support on a regular basis, and we should be looking at giving that to them. I have one request, actually came from the audience. If somebody from your staff could tell me about programs for print disabled people and what opportunities there might be in higher education. And if they could get that to me, I would get it to the person that asked me. Are there any more questions or comments? Representative Zerwas, one more? No. Just pulling your leg. Okay.
Don't worry.
Okay. If that's, huh? Okay. If that's it, then we're adjourned.